people with the names of some of my family members. Maybe if I'm really, really intentional about what it means to call somebody auntie or to call somebody uncle and to have that be a term of endearment and respect, maybe I could do that. Are there other people here that might have a problem with associating curiosity and wonder with close family members? A few, not as many as I would expect. Okay, well, you all have amazing families then. What other words might we use if we were going to intentionally look at people and say, I'm going to see you as this to me in order to cultivate wonder? What are some other labels we might put on them? Being. Spark of the divine. Friend. Welcome. Just welcome, yeah. So we can choose our own words. Sometimes when we read things from wise people, we read these words and we think, oh, I don't think I can do that. I'm not even going to try to adapt it to myself. But when we think about what the intention is of that practice, then we can say, oh, wow, I see a spark of the divine in this person that's wearing a hat that says something I don't agree with and a t-shirt that I find offensive, and they are walking in a way that seems intimidating. I can look at that person and say, spark of the divine. That's a challenge. That's a spiritual practice. But wondering about another person is also an act of humility. When we don't wonder about people, a lot of times we assume that we know everything we need to know. We look at their t-shirt or the sign in their yard or their bumper sticker or whatever, and we create a story about them that is usually pretty simple. We know that in our lives we're pretty complicated. We have layers of depth to us, and we want to be seen as complex human beings, and yet when we look at other people, sometimes we reduce them to a bumper sticker statement. And so this willingness to wonder is also an act of humility in saying, you know what, this other individual has depths that I cannot perceive. They are complex human beings. There are worlds within them, just as there are worlds within me. And recognizing that gives us information about how to love them. Love is not a word that appears in our principles, but it's suggested by all of our principles. And I'm not talking about love being this warm, fuzzy feeling that we get inside and we feel good about things. I mean love as an active commitment to another's well-being. That's what I mean by love. Love is an active commitment to the well-being of somebody else. And we can talk about loving ourselves being an active commitment to our own well-being, but love is a verb. You know, it's an active thing that we do. And so if we're willing to wonder and be curious about other people, it gives us information about how to be actively committed to their well-being without sacrificing our own well-being. Because both are possible. We want a global community with peace and liberty and justice for every person. That's one of our principles. That's what we commit to. So love depends on our willingness to wonder. That vision for the world depends on our willingness to wonder. How can a practice of wonder help us nurture equity and justice and compassion in our relationships? How can a practice of wonder help us live into that vision? Oh, see, now I've asked a question you're going to be thinking about all week because you don't have an immediate answer for it. It can give you hope. Yeah, that'll keep us going. A new question? For if you have a wonder, then you have a new question than the ones that might immediately come to your typical script of questions for people. You don't know. Yeah, so that humility, yeah, it opens our way to recognizing that we don't always have all the answers and we can keep exploring things. That can help us create greater equity and justice and compassion if we keep exploring possibilities.
Realization that we are similar.
Yeah. I remember reading, I think it was a book by the Dalai Lama, and I can't remember which one, but he was talking about being on a bus and seeing another person and thinking about how many differences they had and how different their lives were. And then suddenly he realized, oh, that person has an elbow. I also have an elbow. I wonder how many other things we have in common. And when we start thinking about it and wondering and being curious about that, we find probably a lot of things. So what do we lose or risk by not wondering? What do we miss out on, or what do we risk by not being curious, by not cultivating a sense of wonder? What's at stake? Understanding? Yeah, you might just shut the door before you get to meet somebody who's a really awesome person. We miss out on understanding. Expansion. We get to grow if we wonder, and we just lock ourselves in if we decide not to do that. That's what we risk. Yes, that also. We risk that too. That might have just been an amen. We don't say amen a lot, but we do have enthusiastic barks from time to time. Yeah, when we wonder about people and we're able to expand our perspective, then we get to wonder about ourselves too, right? We get to go about our lives in a different way because we've had that connection with somebody else. We miss out on that if we're not curious, if we don't wonder. Thank you. You probably have some other things that will come to mind as you keep thinking about this in the days ahead. But I just want you to consider what's possible for the world, what's possible for us, if we're willing to embrace this sense of wonder, this sense of seeing no stranger, not encountering anybody that we are going to dismiss as not part of us, but being willing to encounter everyone, even everything that we see in the world, as a part of us that we don't yet know. And so you can do this when you encounter people on the street or in the store or on a screen. You know, you can use whatever terms, if you like, brother or uncle or auntie or sister. If those words work for you, you can put those labels on there, or whatever other labels work. You can develop a practice of cultivating wonder in that way. You can also do that with plants and animals and other natural things around you. You can look at it and be in wonder and say, you are a part of me that I don't yet know. We can do that with things that are not people. And this trains us to recognize all others as part of us. We create an embodied sense of that interconnected web that we talk about. We train ourselves to be people who wonder. And our biases are going to come up when we do this. That's just a natural thing that's going to happen. Don't be afraid of that. That's just part of the journey. We can keep returning to wonder and keep coming back to that sense of, oh, wow, this is something I didn't know I thought about people. That's interesting. Okay, we'll keep moving forward from here. That's just part of it. Another piece of it, though, is that we do have to learn to grieve with other people and to experience their pain. And so we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But I'll take a breath and let us move in a new direction for this moment.
Good morning. Wow, that surprised me. Do we have any Taylor Swift fans here today? Just by raise of hands. Some of us, a little bit. Any favorite Taylor Swift songs? Sorry? Red, perfect. Anyone else? Wow, I found like the least excited about Taylor Swift group in all of Cleveland, Ohio here today. I wouldn't call myself exactly a Taylor Swift fan. Just because of how enthusiastic and dedicated that group of people are. Of course, I think she's very talented, and I understand why she's so beloved. But I do know her music because my wife is a huge Taylor Swift fan, which is maybe a better way of saying it is it doesn't matter if I'm a Taylor Swift fan. I have listened to a lot of Taylor Swift's music. And because apparently I'm speaking to a less Swifty group here, if you don't know that much about Taylor Swift, you can't imagine how popular and how influential like Taylor Swift is. I mean, you really can't imagine it. I mean, her music is among the most highly streamed on YouTube and Spotify, places like that. If you grew up in the 60s, early 70s, if that's your sort of musical roots, I would say, imagine like if the Beatles had the megaphone of the internet. That's the level that we're talking about. Her message gets out there, is the point. The other thing to say about Taylor Swift, if you don't know that much about who she is and sort of her music, is that she's sort of famous for having lots of songs about breaking up. She dates a lot, she breaks up a lot, and then she writes about it. Now, obviously, lots of popular music is about heartbreak, but Taylor Swift, she weaves her songs so closely to her personal life so that these individual songs are linked to individual relationships. So her music is just way more specific. It's definitive about this experience of grief and loss than a lot of other music is. And as a listener to Taylor Swift, this is the part that, like, it's the kind of thing you think about it once and it doesn't hit you, but then you think about it twice and you're like, that's kind of amazing. People find joy and affirmation in these songs that are specifically about loss and grief. And to me, it captures one of these ironies of what it is to be a human person, that you make meaning out of loss, and that grief is extremely close to joy. These are more deeply connected than we realize. There's a feeling you get when an artist puts into words something you only have feelings for. And Taylor Swift does that. It feels like they're interpreting your own personal experience, but in the process of realizing how seen you are, you realize and you get a deep sense of that oneness that links us all together as people. I mean, that's amazing kind of on its own, and it's a huge affirmation of how powerful music is. But it's also a lesson about how much this grief and loss informs our sense of love and joy. It's a hard thing to learn because, of course, it's very difficult to try to understand your grief when you're in it. It's not a very learning place that we're in when we're grieving. It's too much to ask of ourselves. So how amazing is it that someone like Taylor Swift and other artists like her, they lend us their grief and loss so that we get to learn what it is to see joy and love. It's quite a thing. It's quite a thing. It's amazing what generosity you can find on the radio if you're looking for it. These are profound experiences, grief, love, joy. There are times when it feels like we've even lost the language always to talk about them. When Taylor Swift performed in Cleveland just a few years ago, she had to play Brown Stadium because there was no other venue that would fit her. No other venue. Call me optimistic, but maybe there are extraordinary resources for bringing goodness into this world that are just waiting to be tapped. Maybe there are more people out there who are ready to be intentional about that work than we realize. Maybe we should listen to pop music more carefully.
Each Sunday, we donate the offertory collection to a worthy organization. Today's recipient is UUJO. Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio is a volunteer organization of UU activists committed since 2014 to connect individuals, congregations, Ohio communities, and organizations with the larger world to serve justice, equity, and inclusion. UUJO serves the 38 UU congregations and fellowships across Ohio. The mission is to offer education, advocacy, and action consistent with our liberal religious principles, and to witness with and on behalf of marginalized groups and individuals. Recently, they have focused on bail reform and police accountability, election restrictions, and climate change. An ongoing activity is providing information on how to contact legislators and write letters to the editor about proposed legislation. In the words of the late Representative John Lewis, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. UUJO is helping people do something. Please support the work of UUJO as you are able through a plate donation or via our Cash App, $UUCC 44122. And while you're at it, do something.
We dedicate our offering today with the words found on your yellow pew card, the acceptance of gifts. We offer these gifts with gratitude, and we acknowledge the constant gifts of time, talent, and treasure that strengthen and nourish this congregation as a reflection of our commitment to community within and without, our purposeful spirituality that is ever searching and growing, and our intentional actions that lead to greater justice in our congregation, our city, our nation, and our world. You know, this next little part is the surprise part 2 of the sermon because it didn't show up in the order of service. Our orders of service are not going to continue to be on 8.5 by 11, by the way. This was just a fluke this week, and we decided it was better, once they got printed, not to just toss these, and I knew that you would be understanding and forgiving about 1 week of 8.5 by 11. We'll go back to the larger size bulletins next week. But I wanted to mention a little bit about grief. when it comes to connecting with other people. We talked about shame last week. That's one of the things that often prevents us from meaningful connection, but grief and other people's pain is another thing that sometimes stands in the way. We had a group that got together this past Wednesday just because they needed a safe container for their grief about the Supreme Court decision regarding Roe versus Wade. And the group was able to gather and express some of what was going on for them. Some people were able to identify how that grief affected them physically. Some people weren't quite there. But Valerie Cower writes that grief is the price of love. If we are going to be meaningfully connected with other people, grief is part of that connection. Loving means that one day you will be grieving. The more you love, the more you grieve. And we have so much that is causing people grief right now, and it seems like we just heap grief upon grief these days. But loving someone means grieving with them and letting their pain bleed into our own hearts. That's tough. That's vulnerable. When we see that pain coming, a lot of times we want to throw up the guardrails and send up red flags and say, oh, that person needs too much from me. I need to get away from that person. They are in pain, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. I got enough pain of my own. Let me step aside. Somebody else needs to care for them. Grieving with people is an act of surrender. A lot of times we feel like we have to do something to make it better, and really, there's nothing that we can do to make a lot of people's grief better aside from just be with them, be present with them in that grief. And so there's a sense of surrender to that grief that says, there's nothing that I can do, and I'm going to choose to be connected with you in your pain. But when you think about it, this is another way that we support our principles and we support our vision for the world, because America's greatest social movements for civil rights, for immigrants' rights, for women's rights, union organizing, queer and trans rights, farm workers' rights, indigenous sovereignty, the Black Lives Movement, all of those movements were rooted in the solidarity that came from shared grieving. People grieved together first, and then they organized together to create change. When people who have no obvious reason to love each other come together to grieve something that is happening in the world, it gives birth to new relationships and even revolutions. So, part of the issue with grieving with others is we have to figure out what to do with our own grief. Either the personal griefs that we are experiencing or the collective griefs that we have from the gun violence that we continue to see, the court decisions that make our lives less free, the continued grief that we feel from the pandemic and all of its ramifications. There are so many things, and we're not all grieving the same things in the same ways. But when you think about your grief, what do you notice in your body? Like I said, some people on Wednesday night were able to specifically say, this is where I feel grief in my body physically. And some people said, I'm not really that connected to my body. I don't know that I have a feeling of grief in my body. Sometimes we do that. We're so smart as Unitarian Universalists that we stay in our heads and we forget that there's a whole rest of our body that contains things. But that's okay. You can get there if you want to feel where the grief is in your body. That's something you can figure out and learn. But what is the shape of that grief inside of you? What do you need in order to address the grief that you feel? And if that feels uncomfortable, let me just say, it's not going to get any better by ignoring it. If you're willing to breathe and move through that grief, whatever it happens to be, then you'll be able to find a safe container for it, a way to move through it. What does your body need to be brave with this grief? What do you need to feel it and to move through this energy? Who do you need around you in order to take that journey? What rituals call to you? So some of you here I know are accustomed to creating safe containers for your grief. How do you do that? How do you create a container for your grief? Maybe it's something you're not feeling right now, but it's something you felt in the past, so you're talking about history instead of present tense. What do you do to create a container for your grief so you can move through it? Keep busy, okay. Community, get with other people. Move, yeah, that's part of what the labyrinth walk was about for some people last week, was just being able to move and sit with something. Journaling, yeah, writing down things sometimes helps us have a clarity that we don't have when things just spin in our heads. Therapy, yeah. There are trained people out there to help you process grief. Do not be afraid of them. Sometimes we think that going to therapy means something's wrong with us. And if there is, then something's wrong with all of us. Everybody should be in therapy.
I write songs.
Yeah, creative work, writing songs, creating visual art. Really feel it. Just give it time and don't distract yourself with other things, but just let it be what it is. Yeah. Music. Yeah, sometimes we can create music. Sometimes just listening to music helps us to process it, because some of the arts express emotions in ways that we don't quite have words for. So, in fact, there's a famous quote that says, "Where words fail, music speaks." Some people create a grief altar with objects and photos, and they light candles if they're grieving a person, or if they're grieving an event. They create a physical space to contain that grief. Some people plant flowers or seeds when they're feeling grief. They want to see new life coming up where something might have been lost. Creating scrapbooks. Sometimes I have written letters to people that I never intend to send, because it gives me an opportunity to say something directly to a person that's not around to hear it anymore, but I can put those thoughts down and say them myself. Some people carry talismans that remind us of what we care about. Recognizing what we're grieving gives us an opportunity to recognize what we hope for the world. And so, doing all of these things helps us remember that love outlasts our grief. And if there is somebody in this world that you have not fully grieved with yet, if there's somebody whose story that you have not welcomed into your heart, or a community whose struggle you haven't welcomed into your heart and your awareness, it is possible to do that without having to solve the problems. We do not have to solve gun violence in order to grieve with people who have lost folks. Just being able to say, "I am with you and you are not going through this alone," is the most important thing we can do to be with other people in their grief. And if it becomes too much for us, because there is such a thing as compassion fatigue, when we are experiencing other people's pain, it can feel overwhelming sometimes. We do not have to be on 100% all the time. We can take a step back and do the things that we need to do to ourselves and return to wonder, return to curiosity, take a step back and ask those thoughtful questions we were thinking of before. Yes, thank you for that. And go gently. Go gently with yourselves. Love is sweet labor, a commitment to the well-being of others, an active commitment to the well-being of others. And that sometimes means experiencing their pain, but it also means being with them without having to solve things for them. Being curious about their experience, their depth that is equal to our own. And so we're going to sing a song now. Love will guide us. I'm going to even tell you what number it is so you don't have to just flip through the book. It is number 131 in the gray hymnal. And I invite you to rise and embody your spirit as we sing together. Just a couple of quick announcements. I want to remind you to scan the QR code on the back of your order of service to let us know you were here. We are still doing that contact tracing thing where if somebody emails us on Monday and says, I tested positive for COVID, we're going to send you all an email that says, hey, be on the lookout for symptoms, get yourself tested, all of that stuff. We're just sending it to the people who are here instead of to the whole congregation, because a lot of folks who are online don't need to worry about COVID exposure. But if you don't click that QR code, if you don't scan that and let us know you were here, we cannot let you know if there are any issues. So it's for your benefit that we want you to do that. We have one space left for an office volunteer. If you've got some time during the day and you want to help out in the office here, most of it is answering phones when people call in and helping them get answers to their questions that are easy. Rita also has some basic stuff that you can do, and I think she's in the office today if you want to see her after the service and you've got a little time during the week that you want to volunteer. We also have t-shirts. If you got a Side with Love t-shirt and have not picked it up yet, Suzanne Zilber, you want to wave at folks? Suzanne is going to be downstairs during coffee hour, and she'll have all the t-shirts that you need. Only if you've pre-ordered it. I don't think there's extras yet. One more, Journey 101, the overview part of that spiritual development course that I'll be leading this fall, the overview starts tonight. And I've got 8 people in that. If there are a couple of other people that want to join in, there's room for you. Just let me know, because I'll need to make some room for that in our circle and also with the handouts that we do. And coffee hour downstairs. I invite you, if you don't have anything else to talk about with people, just think about what is the first experience you have of wondering about another person. What do you remember about wondering about another human being? And notice what that openness and curiosity feels like in your body as you share that in coffee hour. But of course, you may have your own things you want to talk about. So as we go forth from this place, may we remember that wonder is where love begins. May we prepare ourselves to love beyond what is comfortable and easy and encounter the world with openness and curiosity. Go with peace and courage.
Let us extinguish our chalice together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.